I asked a question earlier today. It's one of the more healthy questions you could ask if you understand college football, and that is this. Who are the most hated teams in college football? Not historically, I mean right now. Who does America hate the most? I think it's Texas. So I'm going to tell you who my 5 are. I think Texas is the most hated team in college football right now. Well, they haven't won a national title. Yeah, but they act like they have. A lot of Texas folks came at me today and they said, we're the most hated. Like, Texas wants to be hated, but then they dropped the whole, they hate us because they ain't us. Look, guys, I got no problem with Texas, okay? I myself love going to Texas. Not everybody loves you guys, though. I may, but not everyone loves you. But let me just inform you. Let me be the one to break this news to you. When a Texas fan says they hate us because they ain't us, Texas fan is half right there. They do hate you. They despise you at a cellular level. I'm not always sure it's because they ain't you. Some of these folks hate you and would never want to trade places with you. Now, look, I'm not speaking about myself, but I talk to the other fan bases out there. Okay, I talked to a gentleman on the street corner in Kylene, Texas. I made several stops in the state of Texas this past week, and so I got a good, healthy sense of the flavor of disdain towards Texas and Texas fans out there. And it's not always them hating you because they can't be you. Sometimes it's just that they hate you. And that is very, very evident to me across the country. No one's indifferent on Texas. And that's before they've won a national championship. So you should always long to be hated. If they don't hate you, you're irrelevant. So it's a compliment to Sark and company that they're hated. Texas has always carried themselves a certain way. Societally, they've always been prone to look down on you. This is just accurate. If you think you're better than someone, that's okay. Just admit it. Texas fans admit it. At least respect that about you guys. But that causes a lot of folks to hate you. What I was going to say is, imagine if they win a national title. Like, imagine if they win the SEC. Whew. I don't know if you can get higher than number 1, but they could push for it. I think Alabama's still up there. Nick Saban's gone. But a lot of the hatred that you developed because of what Alabama has been for a long time, it really hasn't gone anywhere. I see Alabama in person a fair amount. It still feels different, even with DeBoer there. It still feels different around that program than most every other program out there. Now, if they were to hang an 8-4 season this year, folks would love it because it would confirm in their minds, okay, we didn't have an Alabama problem, we just had a Saban problem. And Bama sucked before he got there, and maybe now that he's gone, they'll suck again. America collectively is rooting for this. It's up to Alabama to dispel that. But if Bama hangs on 11-1 this year, if they're playing in Atlanta, if they're primed in the middle of the playoff pack, well, then that is a collective uh-oh from the rest of the country. Because, that Kalen DeBoer guy, turns out he's the real deal. Does that mean we're going to have to deal with Alabama still being Alabama? At which point everyone's tired of Alabama. Bama fatigue, a very real thing. But there's a difference. I've noticed this. I'm going to talk about it a little bit later. Hey, quick timeout. Check and see if you're subscribed to the YouTube channel. If you're not, I humbly ask that you click subscribe. It's free. It doesn't sign you up for anything. What it does is it helps us keep this show free so we can just do college football year-round. All right, back to the clip. There's a difference in Bama fatigue and like the way people feel about Georgia. Because I got to be real with you. I'm not ready to show that graphic yet, that poll yet, but I don't think folks view Georgia the same way. Maybe you just have to win for a decade and a half. You just got to beat folks over the head for like 10 or 15 years. Maybe that's when they start to hate you, but I feel like there's a different level of animosity that people around the country feel and have felt towards Bama for a long time. Now, some of it is a healthy amount of respect, but it's also disdain. And they built it up over a long time. So Bama's still absolutely in this, even if Saban's gone. Miami's there. And Miami hadn't won anything of note postseason-wise in some of your lifetimes. I remind everyone of this weekly because I'm proud of it. We've got a massive 18 to 34-year-old audience watching this show. What has Miami won of note? What kind of hardware have they put in the trophy case since you've been really old enough to appreciate what college football is? Not much. They're still hated. Now, in our 34 to 50-year-old demographic, you were around to understand why Miami was originally hated. And you can tell the younger generation stories, or they could pop on the two-part 30 for 30 documentary series about Miami, which I encourage because the makers of that documentary did a really good job on it. But I've talked about this before, and I'll talk about it once more. If you're of the younger generation, I appreciate you watching, but you cannot fully appreciate how hated Miami was. Miami was a culture shift. That wasn't just a vibe shift in college football. That was a culture shift in America. There was a way winning college football teams had looked forever, and then there was the way Miami looked. And Miami did not look like the vintage Nebraska teams had looked or the modern-day Nebraska teams looked. So a lot of it was cultural, a lot of it was racial, I don't really care. You mix it all into a pot, and then you put icing of athletic competition over that. It's okay to have hatred mixed in. That's part of the reason I love sports. Part of the reason I love football is because it's okay to do on the field to someone what you'd get arrested for if you did it on the street. Well, it's okay in the stands to feel a way about your fellow man that would otherwise be unacceptable if you were feeling that way about him in the office place on a Tuesday afternoon. Miami personified that. There were outlets. If anything, Miami, 80s, 90s Miami kind of served as an outlet to where you blew off some steam. Maybe your Uncle Charlie was yelling some things at the TV in Wedowee, Alabama that you don't necessarily need to be yelling at the post office on a Tuesday. But Miami let him do that. So God bless Uncle Charlie. He let it loose in the living room instead of at the post office. Why? Because Warren Sapp gave him that ability. So thank you, Warren Sapp. Thank you, Miami. Thank you, Howard Schnellenberger and Jimmy Johnson, etc. Well, then they kind of faded for a little while. But Miami folks didn't forget, and the echoes didn't stop reverberating. And every single time, here's what aggravated me. Here's what's aggravated me in my upbringing as a college football fan. Every time Miami won a game against a top 25 team, some lazy journalist would write the headline, "Is the U back?" Or even worse, "Is the swagger back?" Because what I need is a sports writer from St. Paul, Minnesota, using the word swagger in their written lexicon. Well, no, the U hasn't been back, at least in my lifetime. So then Mario gets hired down there, and it's one of their own coming back home. And Miami folks started to beat their chest because they were sure that they had nailed the hire. And then everyone who wasn't sure they had took the total opposite approach, and we're going to hate on Miami. So what you've developed is you've got a program that hasn't won anything of note in a long time that still polarizes the college football public. That means they're a prime candidate to be one of the most hated teams in college football still. Every other team I've got listed here has won or is like perennially top five. Miami not necessarily yet, although they've increased their win total every year under Mario. Talent rosters look better every year under Mario, but I'll ask the same thing about Miami that I'd ask about Texas. What are y'all going to do if they actually win? What are y'all going to do if they actually win in the playoff or God forbid they contend for a national championship? What would happen? I shudder to think. Michigan, surprisingly, has made this list. I don't think if the Stallion stuff wouldn't have happened that they'd be on here. Just to be honest, I think the way Michigan went about building towards that run they made under Harbaugh and being sort of the last version of a great college football program where they were never ranked top 5 in recruiting, but they had freshmen that stuck together until they were sophomores, stuck together until they were juniors, and then seniors, and they started beating their rival, and then they capped it off with a national championship win, and then the head coach and the team kind of ride off into the sunset. If it were just that, they wouldn't be hated for that. Outside of Columbus, Ohio, State College, East Lansing, they wouldn't be hated for that. But then when you heard the Connor Stallion stuff, whether there's validity to it or not, I'm not even here to litigate that. The fine folks at NCAA headquarters are doing that as we speak. And I'm sure we'll be talking about that more in the coming months. But whether all of it's real or all of it's fantasy, people think what they think about it. So your opinion is frozen. It's not going to change about that. I think enough people view it through lenses of skepticism that they've come to hate Michigan. And then Michigan, not that they care that they're on this list, but they do themselves no favors getting off this list because they do exactly what I would do if I were a Michigan fan. just double barrel middle finger. We don't care. We won the title. Rest of you can put in the blank anything that you want to. It's a very kid-friendly show. I want Charlie and Susie to be able to listen with Dad on the way to work tomorrow morning. So I don't necessarily finish the sentence the way that our friends up in Michigan probably would finish the sentence, but you get the point. So they're hated, but Ohio State's also hated. So Ohio State made this list for me. The reason I think enough people nationally hate Ohio State is because they win, obviously, but also I gather through my correspondence with my audience that everyone respected the run they just made in the playoff, but not everyone respected that they lost 2 games and still got that shot. Like a lot of people viewed Ohio State as this huge beneficiary of the new format, which they were. So, I don't hate them for that, but this isn't about me. A lot of you do hate them for that. A lot of you hate them because you hear a lot of whining when things don't go their way. You say the same thing about Bama, by the way. The most consistent bits of feedback I got about Ohio State and Bama were either they win a game or they got 15 excuses why they lost the game. And whom's to thunk it, by the way? My goodness, Ohio State fans and Bama fans complaining. Never heard it. Never heard of it. But, yeah, I put Ohio State up there, too. They made a run. They won the title. You got folks out there, and this is the part of the argument I really don't buy into, but there are a bunch of folks who say, well, I could win a title if I just went and bought a class. Yeah, you couldn't. And they didn't in that way, in the way that is suggested, they didn't. But here's who I didn't put on the list. I didn't put Notre Dame up there. I don't think Notre Dame's one of the 5 most hated teams in college football right now. I really don't. Here's how I can prove that. Do you think that America was pulling for Notre Dame or Ohio State in the national title game? Like, in a previous generation, most of the country would have pulled for anyone against Notre Dame. I don't think that hatred is there like it used to be. They're not loved. Don't get me wrong. If this was a top 10 list, Notre Dame would be on it. But I don't get the sense. Marcus Freeman's a really likable coach. They're not like littered with future first-round draft picks. They don't load up. They don't like vastly overspend in NIL to where you look at it and you say, I hate that they're abusing the system. There's none of that vitriol towards them. The whole independence tag that they still have on them, it makes the older folks a lot more pissed off than it does the younger folks. They have not won a national championship in this lifetime. So a lot of the reasons people used to hate Notre Dame, they're there, but the volume's turned way down on it. So I didn't put them top 5. I didn't put USC top 5, but if they win this year, they'd enter the top 5. USC would be more hated than Michigan the moment Lincoln Riley made the playoff. So USC's just waiting. They're in the on-deck circle. They're using the donut. They're still using the donut on the bat. They're taking their practice swings, and if they go 10-2 this year, they make the playoff. Everything that you hated about USC will be right back. I long for those days. I long for it. Notable in their absence on this list is Georgia. So you want to talk science. We're a very pro-science show. I'll prove it to you. I ran a scientific poll earlier today because I was starting to put my list together, and I thought, I think Georgia's the number 1 program in college football right now. I got Kirby Smart as the number 1 coach in college football right now. Normally, a couple of national championships recently, they win every year. That's a recipe for hatred. Plus, they're in the SEC. That's a recipe for hatred. And yet I thought to myself, is Georgia one of the 5 most hated teams in college football? And myself said, no, they're not. I don't know what it is. They win a lot. They are just an alpha program. They're ultra aggressive in every aspect of football. And yet I don't think the hatred's there. So I ran a poll. And I said, do we feel like Georgia is a top 5 most hated team right now? They tell you the country is divided and they'd point towards politics. No. The political world pales in comparison to the divide we have on the Georgia hatred question. So as of airtime, I put this poll out. Does Georgia feel like a top 5 most hated team right now? It's 51.4 to 48.6 yes to no. We got nearly 7,000 votes on that thing. And it was in the replies, by the way. I don't even know how people found it. But 7,000 of you voted on this. 51 to 49, basically. Yes, no. So the country's totally divided. Well, point being, I think the other ones, if I put it out there, Jesse and Colin, I think 60+% would say yes on Texas, yes on Bama, Michigan or Ohio State, 55 or higher. I think Miami would be up there. Georgia, I just don't, I guess congratulations maybe? Or maybe this is a huge slight. This is like the version of a couple of years ago where Kirby convinced half his locker room someone picked him to go 7-5. Maybe he needs to tell them they think you're more cute. They think you guys are more adorable than hateable. Maybe that's what Georgia needs to go on a run this year. I don't know. I'm with the 51% crowd. I don't think they're one of the 5 most hated teams right now. That's me. And that's science you're arguing with. So if you disagree, you're disagreeing with me and science. You can do one. I don't recommend doing both.